Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the reference recording for Handel's 12 Concerti Grossi Opus 6. Now, some of you probably already know what this is, but before we get to the big reveal, I want to tell you a little bit about my relationship to these pieces, because I just think it's just an interesting sort of story in music appreciation, and how, we can ignore received opinion or come around to it or whatever. Now, back in the day, I was in charge of repertoire for a community orchestra, the New York Symphonic Arts Ensemble, which was a wonderful group of people. We had a very, very good time. And we did all kinds of weird repertoire. We did Martineau symphonies and Vaughan Williams symphonies and things that other people weren't doing. We gave the U.S. premiere of George Lloyd's Fifth Symphony. I've talked about them before. And a bunch of Mahler stuff. And I was a percussionist, so I wanted to do things that had percussion. But there was a repertoire committee, which I chaired. And, every year we would squish into my teeny tiny apartment and I would play all kinds of weird stuff and ask if we could do it. Most of the time they were very accommodating. But one thing the string players always wanted to do was the Handel Opus 6 Concerti Grossi. Some of them, not obviously all 12, because it's, 2.5 hours of music. And I was always really down on them. I said, who cares? The string players always want things where they get to play the tune, and it's just uninteresting, and it's typical Baroque stuff and all of that. And so we did do them, but I just wasn't into it. Of course, they had nothing for me to do, and I dismissed them completely out of hand. Then, the radical thing happened. I actually sat down and listened to them, because I never reviewed them. I never had anything to do with it. But eventually, they kept coming out, and here I am, a record critic, and they keep coming out, and I'm reading other people's reviews of them. And I said, I really need to listen to these suckers, even though I think they're boring and silly and a waste of time. And I listened to them, and the heavens opened. They're magnificent. They're like my favorite pieces of Baroque instrumental music now. They're unbelievably gorgeous. And what is so gorgeous and fabulous about them is, first of all, the fact that each one is completely formally different from all the others, because it's Handel. And second of all, his handling of simple string textures to create the most beautiful effects of light and shade and sensuous timbre. And, Handel, as I've said before, was a hedonist. There was nothing austere about Handel. And he loved sound, the sound of instruments, and creating a beautiful sound. And these Concerti Grossi were just so tuneful and delightful. And I thought to myself, I must have been the biggest ignoramus in the universe to ever, not want to have these things played more often, because they are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And so there's a lesson there, my friends, a lesson. The lesson is keep on listening, and also, all's not false that's taught in the public schools. In other words, some of these pieces have their reputations because they deserve them, not because they're part of some sort of nefarious, conspiratorial, classical music, cultural, military, industrial complex that's trying to jam this stuff down our throats. These are great pieces, really great pieces. So with that said, I started collecting them. I started collecting hundreds of thousands of versions of them, because there were many, many of them. And the reference recording, because I was in the same position all of you are. In other words, I had no special knowledge. None of us start with any special knowledge unless we happen to know somebody, and nobody knew Handel, who's still with us. I read reviews, lots of reviews, and I had been reading reviews and following sort of the history of these pieces and the literature, and seeing what was selling, and talking to my friends in record stores, and my friends in Europe, and all that stuff, to see, what the consensus was for the reference recording. The reference recording at that time, and we're talking in the 80s and 90s, mostly the 80s, was this one. Neville Marriner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. Yes, indeedy. Now, these actually came out. Let me see what this was. In 1968 is when the whole set came out of Opus 6. And I wasn't, I was 7 years old in 1968, so I didn't come to them until quite a bit later. But by then, they had achieved their reference status. And well did they deserve it. Now, of course, the period instrument stuff was happening, and we were hearing, dry as dust new recordings of these by every English period instrument group in the world, with no vibrato and strings that were sometimes not terribly in tune. And then, of course, Harnoncourt did it, and he added the optional oboe part, so they sounded quite honky, and whatnot. However, this was the one, and it was the one for a lot of reasons. Many, many reasons. Not just that Handel, being, at least British by adoption, was always getting pushed by the English military-industrial complex. They may not have been pushing the repertoire, but they were pushing the performers. And these were originally on Argo, if I'm not mistaken, but it says here Decca, so maybe they were always on Decca. I'm not sure. One of you people will tell me. It's not really important. But the fact of the matter is that in 1968, there was no more elegant, shapely, authentic version of this music. By authentic, I mean stylish, really stylish and idiomatic. Yes, they played on modern strings. Yes, they did that. But they were an effort to play with smaller forces, with the kinds of sounds that the music was written for. I'm not saying the kinds of sounds that today's period instrument groups make, because we have no idea if Handel would have even recognized that as what he had intended. But it's also worth pointing out that the keyboardist here is Thurston Dart, really cool, and where they use an organ, the organist is Andrew Davis. I mean, some of these people, are kind of like, they became quite well known. I mean, the soloists are Iona Brown. Alan Loveday is one of them. Really, Neville Marriner plays the violin here. It's really a wonderful, collegial, beautiful set of recordings. And the thing is, I think that it's impossible to overestimate the importance that Marriner and his group really had in creating a market to hear this music in its more authentic varieties, to making it live again, to make it part of the active repertoire, part of the music that we normally go to hear, not as some sort of historical recreation or something which has obviously been updated from its primitive and rudimentary beginnings. I mean, what Marriner showed in these performances is that there was nothing stylistically or aesthetically immature in Handel's inspiration in these works. That as he wrote them and played with reasonably sized and with reasonably baroquely aware people, they are as great and mature and rewarding and expressive and rich as any music since. And I came around to that from starting at the absolute opposite pole regarding this music's significance, and Baroque music kind of generally, frankly. So I owe a lot to this recording personally, but that has nothing to do with it. Actually, it's not my favorite version now, so that's okay. I've come around to have several others that I think I prefer when I want to listen to these pieces, and some of them are on period instruments, so there you go. It just goes to show, right? But there's no question that this set is still has a very, very honored place in my record collection. I do listen to it now and again, and I always enjoy it when I do. So there you have it, the reference recording for all these different reasons, and not just for the personal significance, but for the fact that these pieces really help to put Baroque orchestral music back on the map of the average music lover's daily listening. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.